Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Another episode of LMTV Wireshark, or LMTV Sharkfest, actually more accurately. And it's the first one that we have done, that we're doing, that is well after the event. And so this is now, we're actually executing what we had in mind, which is a Wireshark off season. Talking about Wireshark outside of that 5-day window of Sharkfest, and that's why we called it Wireshark off season 24/7 360, if I did my math correctly. So today, to kick off that series, is Tony Fortunato, and with him is Paul Orford. They're not one of the same, I assure you. Good afternoon, Tony.
Hello, hello, hello.
And
Thanks.
good evening, Paul.
Hi, Danny.
Okay, so you promised to ask at the end of the show. You promised me that you would ask all the technical questions and leave the jokes to me, right?
That's it. I'm
Okay.
not going to do the jokes.
Because if you try to do it the other way, it won't work.
Yikes.
Okay, Tony. So you have something in your mind. You want to go back to the basic. It reminds me of one of my favorite Woody Allen movie where the girl complimented on him about how good the sex is, and he says, I practice a lot alone, something like that. And so this is really going back to the basics, right? Going back to the basics. How do you practice alone? How do you do Wireshark on your own, right? How do you learn that stuff? Is that it?
Yes, that is correct. And in the days of Network General, people would say sniffing themselves, and we'll leave it at that.
Okay.
So what I did was, I'll just jump right into it. What I did was, I get this a lot, and it doesn't matter if I do a Fluke workshop, a Wireshark University class, troubleshooting, it doesn't matter. I'm always surprised that people who use a product aren't familiar with a lot of the tips and tricks, and I don't know why I'm surprised, because that's not fair. So I usually spend some time showing people what I consider the basics, and quickly realize that to many people it's not the basics. And so I always share little tips and tricks on how to use Wireshark. Some people call it a quick start, some people call it an intro, and it's always nice to kind of refresh people with those basics. And next thing you know, you're using the product a little more efficiently, and you're more apt to use it in general. So I'm going to jump right into it. Obviously, there's for people who don't know, it's not obvious, I guess, there's a slide share that I put up, and you can get the link from the G Plus stuff, and from the YouTube, I assume we'll have the link in there as well. So you can get this and you can work on it. So from here, you can see my little presentation. And who am I? I am a senior network performance specialist, and I got experience training, troubleshooting, implementing network since 1989. And I do a whole bunch of troubleshooting and customized on-site training classes for people. I also do a lot of technical workshops for vendors and resellers and stuff like that. We add value. I also do a 5-day troubleshooting class coming up in Toronto for the people that want to check it out. The email link is on thetechfirm.com. And obviously, I contribute to Love My Tool and a bunch of LinkedIn groups and so on and so on. So that's enough about me. So the purpose of this session, the main goal of a 30-minute session is obviously to introduce you to me if you've never met me, to introduce you to some fundamental Wireshark tips and tricks. I'm also going to show current users of Wireshark tips and tricks they may not be familiar with. We're going to find out what other topics people would be interested in, so I strongly encourage you to either during this session give some feedback, or afterwards through Love My Tool or YouTube, however we like to do that. Just let us know what you'd like to see in future articles or videos. You can also contact me if you go to thetechfirm.com and suggest any future topic suggestions, because sometimes you're watching this after the fact. So many of these notes are from my on-site training sessions, so for the people who've seen me before, some of these may look familiar to you. And as I said, you can contact me directly, and some people have actually asked me, how do you get a quote and stuff? Just email me. We can sort things out. All right, so here we go. Let's start from the basics. So when we have a switched network, which most people have these days, we have to worry about tool placement for many reasons. On the left-hand side here, we've got a laptop running Wireshark Analyzer, and we have a monitor or a span port. And that's kind of important to understand, because one of the things you got to watch out for is many monitor ports. I say many because I haven't tested them all. They will not forward packets with physical level errors, and that's kind of important. So if you have this mirrored port and you know the port you're monitoring, has physical level errors or fiber issues, you're not going to see any evidence of that using Wireshark or a monitor port in general. People blame it on Wireshark, and that's not the case, even though Microsoft will filter those out. It's because of the monitor or the span port in general. So I tell people, be familiar with your equipment, try to figure out what you're going to see, and more importantly, figure out what you're not going to see. If we move over to the right-hand side, we can see a good old tap, the black box tap with another Wireshark analyzer, and this port is going to another bridge or switch or router backbone type connection, and you have to understand that because you are using, for example, Microsoft or whatever operating system, you might not be able to decode trunk protocols. Okay, because sometimes you've got packets that exceed the maximum size and you just may not be able to see them as well. In this case, the tap, the black box, will deliver those packets to us, but because of the analyzer we've chosen or the software, the tool, you might not be able to see those types of packets. If we jump back on the left-hand side, because IT people have ADD, I put an additional note saying when dealing with large networks, I always try to start troubleshooting from the client. And this is a very common question I get all the time. I have a client, I have a server. Where do I start? And I always tell people go to the client for many reasons. Number one, that's where the problem is. You can physically see it. If it's not in the same physical location, building, city, country, maybe you use remote desktop or whatever you want to use to see that screen. But more importantly, the customer is complaining. So you get a lot of benefit from dealing with the customer and trying to make their problem go away because you get that immediate feedback if you make a change and you want to know if it works. On the right-hand side here in the bottom, you got another little bubble that popped up. By default, many default NDIS drivers, that's the Microsoft driver specification, will not forward physical level errors. So you see I have a tap here on the bottom that would let me see the physical level errors. The tap would send that to me. But guess what? Microsoft will not let me see that. So again, this is not a Wireshark issue. It's a Microsoft issue. So I can't stress this enough. When you don't see what you think you see, you have to do a little bit of homework to find out, is it because of the mirror port? Is it because of the tap? Is it because of Microsoft? Is it because of Wireshark? And that type of scenario. And I'm not going to kid you. Sometimes this takes a lot of time, but you need to know why you do or do not see things. On the left-hand side here, we put a mini hub between a laptop, this client, and this switch. And because hubs are half duplex, they just are, you have to make sure that you either manually set your switch ports to half duplex, or you need to make sure the switch port recognizes it's half duplex and you haven't caused yet another problem on top of the one you're trying to fix. So to this day, I still use hubs. And people frown on that, and I say, well, a lot of times it's not a performance issue, it's an application behavior issue. And if I'm dealing with the client, then why not put a hub? If they're cheap, they're easy. I still got a bunch laying around, and you can leverage that equipment that you have. Okay. On the right-hand side, I put an additional note under taps, just saying that we use taps to get full visibility for full duplex links. So whenever you hear, yeah.
So Tony, the hub is like borrowing someone else's reading glasses, right? It's
yeah, pretty well.
Nothing. Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. That's cool. I'm going to steal that. Yeah, exactly. And as I said on the tap here, you've got the taps to get full visibility into my full duplex links, or if you have media that your laptop doesn't support, such as fiber, for example, that sort of thing. Okay. And I put an additional note on the hub on the left-hand side, and is your hub really a hub? And I'm sure Paul can attest to this. There's many boxes labeled hubs, and they're not, they're switches. And there's many switches out there that are labeled switches, and they're not, they're hubs. So, and I'm not going to get into the various combinations of both. It's just, the point is, that's just the way it is, all right? A little trick I like to explain to people when we deal with routed networks is, in this case, if I got a whole bunch of computers going to a switch, going to a router, going to the internet, a very common exercise we like to do is, what data is going remotely? So what data is going across the WAN or across the internet, and that sort of thing. Can get very complicated because I can have different MAC addresses, different IP addresses, different VLANs, and this can get as complicated as you want to make it. But a simple little technique is if I had an actual a tap or a mirrored port or an analyzer, and I was looking at that connection between the switch and the router, I can simply filter on just the MAC address of that router, and you end up getting all the remote traffic. So therefore, if the machines down below are talking to each other, printers, servers, clients, that sort of thing, I won't see that. I'll just see what goes across the internet. And I've had to do that many times to show people that sometimes things aren't configured right and you're going across the WAN to do things that you didn't think you were. Sometimes you have a denial of service. Sometimes you have a virus or spyware that's going across the internet, and you don't want to see all that local traffic. You're just trying to concentrate on that remote stuff. So that's a little trick I like to share people, is filtering on the router's MAC address. I've given a couple of notes that I'm not going to read to you, but I'm just going to tell you what they are. This is a little trick I like to use with Wireshark, that you can actually install Wireshark from the command line. This is for Windows, obviously. And you can put some switches on that. And by putting these switches in the installation program, you can have Wireshark silently install itself without having the constant prompts for the client. It just runs, and then within a few seconds, it's installed, or you can watch it in the task manager or when the icons appear. There's a way of knowing when it's done. So there's a little example I put here on the bottom, Wireshark setup /S, desktop icon no, quick launch icon no. And what that does is it installs Wireshark and leaves no icons on the desktop for the client, because some of them, get antsy about seeing extra stuff on their screen. So it's a neat little trick I like to use when I want to install Wireshark quietly, and more importantly, I don't need the client to get involved with the installation process. The other thing I like to do with Wireshark once it's installed, again in Windows, is if you right-click on the Wireshark icon, you can go to Properties and you can set your shortcut key. So for example, Control-Shift-W, and that's what you do. You hold down the Control key, the Shift key, and you tap W, and it puts that in that key dialog box. That means whenever I want to run Wireshark, I just literally Control-Shift-W, and boom, there it is. Done. Easy. That, to some people, sounds very trivial. But when you use Wireshark a lot, daily, weekly, hourly, whatever it happens to be, it just makes it so much more convenient to get access to the tool rather than hunting through your programs and looking for it. The other thing that I spend a lot of time with, and you'll be surprised how helpful this is when you get comfortable enough with it, when you go to About Wireshark and you click on the Folders tab, it actually tells you where Wireshark stores certain files, your filters, your preferences, and all that kind of stuff. The reason why that's incredibly important is I just did a job a few weeks ago with a fairly large company, and they have a whole networking team across the world. And they said, we'd love to have just the same standard filters. And I said, yeah, you can do that. If you go to your, in this case, personal configuration, you'll see D filters for display filters, C filters for capture filters, and it's simply a text file. So you can edit that text file, put in all the stuff you want, and that way you can have the same filters for everybody. So I would, in this case, edit D filters, put in some certain filters. I would email it to Paul, and it said, hey, here's a new D filters file for you for viruses or Trojans or troubleshooting VoIP or whatever I happen to do. Paul would get this file, he would go to the same folder, copy it there, and then magically you have the exact same filters that I have, instead of trying to explain it to him or copy and paste it and that sort of nonsense. If you do work in a notepad, just a little note, the last line needs to be blank. Okay? If you don't have the blank last line, then you're going to have some issues with your filter. So that last blank line needs to be there. And you can tell by looking at the syntax, it's in this case, it's a standard display filter syntax. Okay? And I do that quite a bit. I also save files with different names. So citrix.dfilters. And then whenever I need those filters, I would just rename the dfilters file. One thing that Wireshark is doing now, which is relatively new, is the introduction of something called a profile. And I can now have a profile that says VoIP or Citrix or security or whatever. But this works just as well, depending on how comfortable you are. The other thing I like to do is when you launch Wireshark automatically, you know, that Control-Shift-W thing I just spoke about, you can also add stuff to the startup. So -I and the number 4, for example, might be your Wi-Fi. It might be your Ethernet, whatever it happens to be. And then -K. When you do that, now when I do Control-Shift-W, it automatically starts Wireshark. It automatically starts capturing. That is cool. That I use a lot. So when you get comfortable with that little trick, then you can just Control-Shift, and you'll do Control-Shift-I for your Wi-Fi. Control-Shift-E for Ethernet, that sort of thing. And all of a sudden people, I just jokingly say you impress your friends at parties with this one. And it's kind of cool, right? When you go through the preferences, and again, I'm surprised how many people don't go through their preferences. The first thing you notice when you do this often enough is you get to notice all the changes with Wireshark, all the little tiny subtle changes, because it's typically reflected in your preferences. And in this case, the user interface screen, there's a lot of these arrows, and I tell people, don't be concerned about all the arrows. Just worry about the stuff that you care about. For example, saving the window position, saving the window size, and saving a maximized state. So those 3 boxes do exactly what you think. If you don't want Wireshark to remember the size, the position, and that sort of thing, just uncheck them. It's that simple. Checking for the updates. I've got some people that become, I say, emotionally attached to their version of Wireshark, and they don't want it to be updated. Well, you can uncheck that, because again, that's a relatively new feature for Wireshark where it says, hey, there's a new version out there. Do you want to update? You might not want to do that. This file open dialog behavior right here, this one is kind of interesting because I leverage this quite a bit. If I'm doing a job with Denny and we're at IBM and we're troubleshooting VoIP, well, I'd probably make a folder on my hard drive called IBM, maybe a subfolder called VoIP, and I'd put all my stuff in there. Well, by default, Wireshark remembers the last directory. So if I just did that one thing all day and stayed in that folder, this would work for me. But if I was moving back and forth, because one moment the customer said, look at the VoIP, and the next moment, look at the Wi-Fi, and the next moment, look at the SQL, I might want to force Wireshark to stay in a certain folder, IBM, and then I would choose which subfolder I'd like to work in. That way my stuff stays organized as I work, and I don't have to sort this out after the engagement. That's all. Okay. And then the last one down here, this is a really interesting one that just got added, enable packet editor. So a lot of people I say to, hey, did you know that you can actually edit packets now with Wireshark? They go, really? I go, yep. And it's this little box, so you click it. And of course it's experimental because obviously it's experimental. But this is an example of a new feature that hasn't been there before that I've actually used quite a bit already. So this is pretty cool. Moving on to the layout screen, the one I'd like to show people is this very last one, the custom window title. And the reason why we do this is because, and I include myself, so please, I don't want to get emails because of the statement. IT people and analysts are typically terrible at documentation, and I'm one of them, all right? So don't complain to me, I'm one of you. What I do is I change the title to whatever I'm doing. So again, it might say VoIP troubleshooting or SQL baseline. And by doing that, in my title bar, it says Wireshark Analyzer, and in brackets, it'll actually have whatever I typed in. Therefore, if I just simply do a screenshot, a screen capture, a print screen, a snippet, whatever you want to call it, the title bar can remind me what I was doing, and it becomes a form of documentation. See? So that's a little trick I use quite a bit as well. When you capture stuff, you should change your default interface to whatever interface you're using, Ethernet or Wi-Fi, so you don't have to remember that. And under the interfaces, you can hit the edit button, and what that does for you is show you all your adapters, and if there's certain ones that you're never going to use, like Bluetooth or VPN, you can hide that interface and put a comment in there if you like. Okay? Because sometimes you've got a VPN adapter, and the comment would be, do not start capturing until the session has been established. That sort of thing. So you can remember that the next time around. Okay. With NDIS 5, Microsoft did something pretty cool. It allowed you to get better performance by offloading who does the checksum. But by doing that, sometimes you get a little trick that you have to work around with Wireshark or any protocol analyzer, and that is the fact that you get these checksum errors. And that's because Wireshark is seeing the packet before the math was done. So if this is a trace from your machine, you might notice any packet you send looks corrupted, but anything that returns to you looks fine. That's typically a symptom or a pattern of this type of scenario, okay? And that's why I did this little diagram here, and you can see Wireshark. So as the traffic leaves, see that? As the traffic leaves, the CRCs are going to be done down here. But Wireshark picked the data up, or the packet up, or the frame up before the math was done. But if you go the other way, obviously the math was correct, otherwise you would have never got it, and everything looks fine. So just keep that in mind if you see that sort of pattern. If you don't want that, then you could always go to your machine in Windows, and you can disable your checksum offloads. Okay, that would fix it. The other thing that we talk a lot about, and you can see I'm kind of on a roll here, is experimenting with various settings. So if you do find yourself dropping some packets, because Wireshark might just drop packets depending on what you're doing, you might want to play with your display options and your name resolution, and that typically offloads Wireshark's work, I'm going to call it, so you drop fewer packets or none at all. If you are going to capture packets, then you should be familiar with some of the filters, because you don't want to capture 4 gigabytes of data if you don't have to. So I've provided some of the more common filters that I use, and people are surprised, like port range. So if I want to do a port range between 80 and 90, there, done. I don't need to do port 80, port 81, port 82, and that sort of nonsense. Subnet filters, net, source, destination net, and then therefore I'll capture all of the packets destined for those IPs in that subnet or range as well. I'm going to skip this one, same old, same old. How do you save your capture automatically? This is a little tip that I posted a while ago that people found interesting. If you put your capture name and path ahead of time, then when you hit stop, it automatically saves that. Okay? If your Wireshark crashes, it would automatically save that as well. The other thing is, if you did not do that, if you didn't happen to do that ahead of time, if you pay attention when you're capturing, it automatically puts a temporary trace file in a temporary folder that is outlined under About Folders, and you'll see that. And the reason why that's important is, if you know where this stuff is being stored temporarily, then again, if you have a crash and you need those packets, you can still go and recover that as well. I'm not going to say this is foolproof, but it's better than nothing. Okay. When you want to do a stop capture, this is very, very helpful. You can set up something called a stop capture trigger, and all this is going to do is, after whatever criteria is met, Wireshark just stops. If you did not provide a name ahead of time, it just stops and sits there, and then you have to remember to save it. Okay. So that's the only thing I tell people to remember. This is not automatically saving anything. Unless you've provided that name ahead of time, this is just simply stopping the tool. In this case, I've checked all 3 boxes, and the common question is, well, when does it stop? Whenever any of these are met first. Okay, this is not in any particular order. It's when any of these are met, any of the criteria. So you have to be careful, because sometimes you leave one checked off, or you did one by accident, and this stops prematurely. Okay. If you want to do something a little different, like a ring buffer, and this is something we cover all the time, is we have multiple files being saved all the time. And the only thing you got to keep in mind here is, what criteria are you using to save these files? People tend to gravitate to time, every hour, every 10 minutes, that sort of thing. I'm not a big fan of that, because 10 minutes may equal a gig, and the next 10 minutes might be a meg. It all depends on how much traffic was flowing at that point in time, right? So I'm more of a fan of size. If I know my laptop can handle 200 megabyte trace files, that's my time. That's it. So I'm going to set it for 200 megabytes. And 200 megabytes might be a minute, an hour, a week, who knows? It all depends on your filters and how much data is moving through the network. But at least I know when I get my trace file, I've got a 200 meg trace. Okay? The reason why I bring this up is because if you have too much data, then you can't open your file, then you need to go to edit cap and chop it up, and you end up causing more work for yourself than you really have to. The file names, when you put a file name up here, you'll have this syntax that gets created automatically, which is the name of your file, and then 1, 2, 3, and so on and so on and so on. And more importantly, when we actually do have our trace files on our screen, the first thing we do is we cover the basics with the time display format. And this allows me to see patterns clearly, okay? So one of the first things we do is, as you go to the time display format, you'll see I have seconds since previously displayed packet. This is also called the delta time, because many times you're trying to show somebody why it's slow. So if I have a command and I have a response, and it's 30 seconds, well, it's 30 seconds. It's slow. And that's because I'm using the delta time. I'm not using beginning of capture. I'm not a big fan of captured packet. This one will give me the delta time even if I have a display filter applied. So this is kind of important. Okay. The other thing that I like to do is make sure that I know what a time reference means, because a lot of people don't know what a time reference is. And that means if I have a whole bunch of packets and I want to see the difference between packet 1 and packet 30, and I don't want to the delta times, then I could set a time reference on my packet, and then wherever I go after that is like a running counter from that point on. So sometimes you have the time display, the delta filter. Sometimes I have the reference filter. And it's important to know when to use either one. But I tell people, get comfortable with the timed reference. It's just a simple toggle, and you just right-click on a packet, and you use the set time reference option. And you'll see that it zeroes in from that packet. It says REF, and then from that point onwards, you have your time reference. Okay. From the protocol preferences side of it, there's a ton of information that when you see TCP, or Transmission Control Protocol, in your detailed view, you right-click on it, and then you go to Protocol Preferences, and it shows you some of the more common things that you want to change. So that way I don't need to go back to Edit, Preferences, Protocols, TCP, and then make your change. This is all on one screen. You don't need to mess with it. This is, and more than likely, if you do anything really detailed, you'll probably have to go back to your preferences. But I'm going to say 9 out of 10 times, this is what you want to do. Okay? From the configuration profile side of the fence, it's kind of interesting that people aren't leveraging this, because I just don't think they know about it. You can right-click, as I said earlier, and you can create your basic profiles. And by doing that, you can save certain colors, certain filters, and you can have all of that available to you when you're troubleshooting. It's just a lot less work to just left-click and choose VoIP, and I've got a totally different layout because I'm doing a VoIP thing. Or troubleshooting versus baselining, that sort of thing. On the I/O graphs, I've been using I/O graphs since it's been available, and I tell you, I can't do without this. This is fantastic. I also do a lot of stuff in Excel, don't get me wrong, but this is a great way to do some of the basic things. So in this case, I put DNS, HTTP, POP, and SMTP, and based on these colors, based on the style, it illustrates to you over time when those protocols came into play. Now, you could also use a standard display format, right? So you can have IP addresses and find out when the server comes in, find out when it gets handed off to another server. You would see a different spike, that sort of thing. But this is incredibly powerful, and I haven't even gone to the advanced portion of the I/O graph. This is just the basic stuff. You should be familiar with that. While you're looking at the graph, the really cool thing about it is you can actually copy this data. And when you copy the data, it saves everything in a comma separated value format, and I can go to Excel, and I can do my own chart, which is kind of cool. You can also hit the Save button if you'd like, but the Save button just creates a graphical format of that graph, like a PNG or bitmap format, not the data, just the graphical thing, like a screenshot, if you will. Okay. So in this case, I did that save, and I did a paste, and you can see in Excel now I've got the same graph. But because I have it in Excel, I can change my x-axis, my titles, my bar type. I've got so much more flexibility, as well as adding additional information that I might want when I want to correlate things between my trace file and something else, like SNMP or some network management system, that sort of thing. So this is huge, because you don't have to do this. So this is provided to you by hitting the copy button in the I/O graph. Okay. The other thing, too, is I say feel free to graph any field name in your trace. And again, it's just the actual display filter syntax. So any field name would work. So if I want to do a TCP window size, I can do that. If I want to do the frame size, anything inside the packet that is measurable can be graphed. And you get a tremendous amount of value into going into the detail screen and pulling out all sorts of things, round trip time or retransmissions, all that sort of thing. And then you graphically see where that fits in that actual, in that trace file, okay? And you can even see here, for example, I've got the window size is up here, nice and high, and in this case it's spiking and dying and zeroing out. So I'm trying to show the customer that this second bottom graph is not healthy, not good. And I'm trying to prove to them that it's the same client, the same server, the same network, just a different app. And that's always difficult to do. How do you prove it's the app? Well, in this case, this was one way to illustrate one facet of the application. Quick conversation filters. If I right-click on any packet in my summary screen or my list, I can simply go to Conversation, TCP, and bang, I get a filter for the 2 IPs and the 2 port numbers. The old way of doing this is statistics, conversations, TCP, find your conversation, right-click, apply filter between them both ways. And this was just one simple click on my packet list. Okay. From this, I also tell people that the TCP filter is automatically applied. The filter consists of a pair of IP addresses and TCP port numbers, just as I said, and the results show the conversations in your summary screen now. So I can concentrate on one conversation as opposed to just a pair of IPs. Protocol analysis tips. I'm always asked for tips and tricks for troubleshooting and protocol analysis. And number one, this is going to sound lame, but anybody in the field appreciates the comment. Look for patterns. And the trick is always, how do you find a pattern? Well, unfortunately, your filters. Based on your filters, you'll see a different pattern. So take traces or captures when things work. And I can't tell you how many times I cringe and slap my forehead when people say, well, it's working fine now. What's the point of taking a trace? Well, that's the point. The point is, if I have a trace when it works, then guess what? It's obvious when it doesn't work. I've got something to compare it to. The other thing that people really feel they have to, and they're obliged to do, is I've captured all this data, but I don't have time to analyze it, so I'm not even going to bother capturing it. And I say that's the furthest thing from the truth. Just capture stuff and save it. That's all. And then when you need to refer to it, guess what? You've got it. I can't tell you how many times I walk into a scenario where they don't have a trace when it worked. And that is extremely difficult. So get in the habit of just taking a quick trace. The key here, though, is get in the habit of capturing specific traces, a login, a boot up, launching an application, a simple query, anything, just very specific things. Because when people complain, very rarely are they saying these days everything is slow. They'll say, when I do a query, it's especially slow. When I print, when I do an edit, when I do an update, like very specific tasks. So if you can break that down ahead of time, you're ahead of the game. Okay? I also tell people to pay attention to things like the TCP three-way handshake. So your SYN and your SYN-ACK. What is that delta time? You know, what is that? And again, that's based on the fact that I'm using that second since previously displayed. So if I have a filter, this is accurate, okay? So in this case, it's 112 milliseconds. And the first time you measure that, you're not going to know if that's good or bad. So use the user experience as your reference point. The user is saying, yes, that is normal, that is good. So 112 is good. If they say, no, 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 that was really bad, then guess what? 112 is bad. As you take more traces, you can further define what that means, but you got to start somewhere, okay? MTU, MSS, and DLY. And DLY is something specific that Cisco spits out when you do a show interface, and it's a delay parameter. In this case, it's 100 microseconds. Why do we look at that? Because if I'm looking at a trace and I see 100 microsecond delay, I know it's from this interface. Right? You need to know what delay means, and he's giving you a portion of that variable, of that formula. Also, MTU and MSS is telling you how much data you can put in that frame. So MTU refers to how much data IP is carrying, and MSS is referring to how much data it's carrying. That's all. It means the same thing, but just from a different layer's perspective. The reason why you need to know what that is when you see those references in a trace file, you need to understand if it's not being efficient. So in this case, I can see the MSS is 1460, which is maximum, but this server is saying 512. See that? So the problem's not at the client end, it's at the server or possibly a device between the two manipulating that MSS. And now you know it sticks out like a sore thumb. Okay? Tool placement, and this is unfortunately a very common thing I run into. Ensuring the proper tool position will save you countless hours. You got a client, you got a server, here comes the data, 1, 2, 3 doesn't make it, and then 3 gets resent. So from the client's perspective, I saw 3 come out twice, and that's called a retransmission. From the server's perspective, I didn't see that. I saw 1, 2, a big delay, and 3. As far as the server is concerned, the delay is from the client side or the LAN or the WAN. See that? So if I don't have the tool in the right spot, I could be missing retransmissions. And you'll think erroneously the delays are from the other end of the network. Okay, and I run into this a lot. Simple pattern to look for, simple things. So when you look for patterns, in this case, this application had a very distinct pattern: data, data, ACK, data, data, ACK, data. Guess what? Data, ACK, so on and so on. And sometimes these are application behaviors. Sometimes these are protocol stack behaviors. And the point is, when you see the pattern, now I know what it looks like. And then guess what? I can look at things like delta time. Look, 20, 21, 21. 21 seems to be a constant latency type number. Hey, guess what? That could be the LAN, that could be the WAN, that could be disk, who knows? But that's a pretty consistent number. That's a pattern. Don't worry about analyzing every number you find. Just get the numbers, right? And I always say, like the old days, get the facts, just the facts, man. And you can also see things like the window size, 16,384, 16,384. And if it's always 16,384 when it's good, when it's bad, it might not be that. It might be 0, right? That sort of thing. Another pattern to look for. So you can see in this case, this particular application sent this data, and then this push bit, which says process now, that sort of thing. Data, push bit, that sort of thing. And when you see that, you say, oh, the application in this case is sending 5 data packets and then a push bit. Well, that's good to know, right? If you are troubleshooting and need to add a column, in this case an IP time to live, I'm in my detail screen, I can right-click and apply that as a column, and magically you get a column. So I'm looking at the time to live. In this case, it's decrementing and duplicating. That's not normal. That's weird. You've got to figure that out, right? File comments and packet comments. So in this case, in the bottom left-hand corner, you got a pencil, a green plus, and a piece of paper, and that allows you to put comments on the file. So you can say, hey, the capture was taken from Tony. I was surfing around. It was taken directly from my laptop using my Wi-Fi, and that sort of thing. Okay. When you do that, the green plus goes away, and I know I have a comment on that file. I can also make a packet comment. So any packet I right-click, I can put a comment in it, and I can say, hey, this was a new HTTP protocol from Google called Quick. And people say, well, how do I know where all my comments are? Well, when you actually go to Analyze Expert Info, packet comments, it says right there, packet number 7, and there's my comment. Okay? It's also a great way of sharing information with my client when I'm troubleshooting, because they can look at the comments right in the packet. Packet slicing, instead of getting the whole packet, don't. Get the first 120 bytes. That'll give you plenty of information to work from. Many times we don't want a full packet. For example, we want to conserve disk space. So like I said, you might have a 200 meg trace. Well, if you slice it, 200 megs would go a lot further. Sometimes you have legal or privacy concerns, and I don't want to see the data. I can't see the data. I'm not allowed to see the data. And again, by slicing the packet, I don't need to see the data many times, and I just need to know who's doing what and the behavior of the application. Okay? And in this case, if I double-click on the interface, I can limit my packet to 120. When I'm looking at a trace file, it tells me the true length of the packet, 262, and then it says that it's been sliced down to 120. I've also added some notes here on how to capture from the actual command prompt. Again, I'm just going to quickly zip through this. I talk about putting Wireshark in your path. I show you the syntax of T-Shark, and I show you an example of actually figuring out your interface, and then how to start testing, and how to start capturing. Okay, and I give you some examples of some of the more common command line stuff. Why do we go to the command line? We want control, we want consistency, and possibly you're dropping packets using the GUI. Okay, that's it, folks. So as I said, I kind of didn't rush through it, but I kind of talked about the points because this is available as a slide share, and you can sit down at your convenience and you can try to reproduce what I said. And if you have any questions, by all means, you can ask me or through Love My Tool and that sort of thing. Woo! There you go.
Well done. That's good. Really good. You know what?
Italian.
the funny thing is that I've been using Ethereal and Wireshark for years, and I watch someone else using it, and I always find something new.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
There were some really good things in there. The ones I made a note of were shortcut key. Excuse me. Shortcut key to get it started. Of course, it's a Windows function. I never even thought about using a shortcut key. I mean, I've got Wireshark on my taskbar, but you know, that's a really great tip. And the other one, which I've put exclamation marks about, is about folders, which I didn't know about. I'd never looked at that before. That's a great tip as well. Yes, it's really great watching someone else use it. And the profiles thing, I was a real latecomer to profiles. I watched a few videos with you know, Betty and you know, Laura, and they're banging on about, you know, going on about profiles over and over again. I thought, oh, profiles, you know, I'll just keep hacking away at my default profile. But I've become a real convert recently, and it's so much faster. You know, I've got some profiles set up, and I attended a session by a guy called Phil Shade, I think his name is.
Yep.
Yeah, at Sharkfest this year, and he had a profile specifically for looking at malicious attacks on networks, and he'd got certain color codes and certain features. I thought it was great, really good. So yeah, it's good.
Well,
I enjoyed it. Yeah, great stuff.
And any one of those topics, I'm sure Paul can appreciate, could be a simple 1 hour or a half-hour session just on its own. But I kind of just dump all that stuff out there, and then whatever people gravitate for or to, good for you. And I'll be honest with you, that's the tip of the iceberg. There's when I do the 5-day Wireshark class, it's 5 days of tips and tricks, and people are amazed. Like Paul said, you watch somebody else do, and you go, "Oh my God, I never thought of that. That's brilliant," you know. And then you steal other people's tips and tricks, and that's how we all get better, right?
Yeah, definitely. One of the things I noticed, you use TCP conversations, and I tend to use follow TCP stream. Do you detect any difference between those two? Is there a reason why you prefer one above the other?
Yeah, great question. The follow the stream gives you that output of that text, the telnet or HTTP or SQL, whatever the body, the frame, the payload.
Which I always then close.
Yeah, exactly why, because then you then close it. Where if I just do the conversation, I skip that whole part of it, and when you have a big trace file, trying to manage or go through all that data tends to slow everything down anyway. So I just find it quicker. That's all.
Okay.
It's just a preference.
Okay. The other one was I agree with you about ring buffers. What we found is 200 meg is a good number for ring buffer size, because when you come to analyze the data on a 64-bit machine, 200 meg, when you're doing repeated filters and sorting and things, that works fine.
Yeah.
If you go too much bigger, the PC starts to struggle. In the old days, when we were on 32-bit, 200 meg would be out of the question. We tend to stick to 50 or 100, but yeah, 200 meg is a good size.
I also mentioned to people that they have to remember ring buffer is a simple process of stopping, saving the file, starting a capture, and then moving on. But there's that moment of time between them where you lose stuff. So you don't want to make it too small that you have a lot of gaps. You don't want to make it too big that it's not usable. That's all. But yeah, 200 is my rule of thumb too.
Yeah. Do you you use T-Shark as opposed to dumpcap for your command line activity? One of the things we found is that because T-Shark works like Wireshark, as it's capturing, it's building structures of protocol structures.
Right.
If you leave it running for too long, it just blows up.
Yep.
So dumpcap just sucks it off the card and squirts it onto the disk and doesn't try to do anything clever. Do you find, do you have to use one above the other, or why have you got a preference for T-Shark?
I just find it's just my personal preference. I always introduce people first to T-Shark, and then when they start running into some barriers and issues, I would say, by the way, dumpcap is the evolution. That would be the next thing you play with. But just to get people going, I just find T-Shark tends to be a little more intuitive for people as they're figuring it out. But then after that, I'm with you. I always dumpcap it. But that's where I started.
But I think that point, I know you had to do that quite quickly, but that point you made about using command line so it's repeatable and consistent is great, because you can shove the command into a batch file, a .bat file, drop it on a desktop, you can just keep running it over and over again, and it'll always collect the same stuff, and that's a really, I find that really useful.
Yeah, and even for my lab, because people forget, when you want to test in your lab, you want consistency. So sometimes I literally have a scheduler that says, start Wireshark, and then the next thing in the schedule will start the FTP, and then so on and so on and so on, right? And it's just less work for me, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, great stuff. Yeah, I've got lots of, what was the last one I had? Oh yeah, comment in the file. That's something I've seen you demonstrate before. I still don't use it. I've got to get into that. That's a great idea. It's better than, just adding comments to an email body and then attaching the file, and then the two become detached and nobody can remember what the comments were. And
that's exactly why I use it, because people send me trace files to work on remotely, and I used to do exactly what you said, Word documents, emails, and now it's just so much easier. As long as you save it in a PCAP-NG format, I just put all of my packet comments in, all my file comments in, and say, hey guys, go to town. Here's where you find the comments. And they're like, oh, this is awesome, right?
Yeah. Great stuff. Sorry, Danny, you were going to say.
No. It's fine. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Tony. So we probably should wrap this up. So thanks again, Tony, for kicking off our Wireshark off season. And I just want to let the audience know, remind the audience that Tony is probably one of the most prolific technologists contributing to the Wireshark community. And so you can always find him on his own website, thetechfirm.com, techfirm.com. And while he was doing his presentation, I did something, and I meant it as a gift for his contribution today from both Tim and I. So if you were to go to thetechfirm.tv,
oh, what is that?
It would show his YouTube channel. So he's got over how many YouTube video do you have now? Each are about 3 minutes long, I think. Over 2,000, over 1,000, right?
Oh man, you know what, Denny? I've totally lost track.
I think last time I checked, for some reason I couldn't find the statistics today, but last time I checked it was over 1,000, maybe over 2,000.
I know Wireshark is up to 250 or something like that. Somebody told me the other day.
So it was probably, well, then in that case, maybe I overcount. Maybe I remember more than half.
Sure.
Are Wireshark video.
Yeah, I got a lot to say.
Yeah. So I will transfer the ownership to you. Okay?
Thanks, guys.
So this is a quick way for our viewers to either find out. To go to the full website, thetechfirm.com, which contains all the videos, all the my 2 articles, even have Tony's schedule and lots of stuff that he has. I believe we all have our own website, and someday that will become a tombstone, I think.
Yeah.
I think that's
that's
the purpose, yeah. But if you just want to see the video, then just go to thetechfirm.tv. And also, if you want to see all of my 2 articles and LMTV videos that are related to Wireshark or Sharkfest, then similarly, you can just go to sharkfest.tv, which would point to a page on Love My 2 that has all the articles. And again, just to summarize, today is the first episode of the LMTV Wireshark, LMTV Sharkfest that is dedicated to Wireshark during the off season, right? And so
cool.
I'm sure Tony will come back, and I'm sure Paul will come back, and I think this is a very successful format, and I believe this is a very good way to serve the Wireshark community during the rest of the time.
Agreed.
Yeah. Thanks again, Tony. Thanks, Paul. Any last word, Paul?
No, great session, Tony. Great session. Really enjoyed it.
Yeah. So there is a rumor, and let's just put it. There's a rumor that there might be a Wireshark Sharkfest in Europe. So we look forward to that. And then so I believe you will play. Yeah, it would make sense that we'll continue to service that. And then there's a rumor, and I'll just put it out there, that some of your 3-minute video might get promoted or picked up or something by some publishing powerhouse. So we just leave it at that then, Tony, just to kind of let our audience. Yeah. No, I am very happy for you. I am really happy for you. I think that's a really, I mean, we all know the contribution that you made. Those 3-minute video that you done is really, I mean, just from all the feedbacks that I hear, and I think that it's good to get some recognition.
Oh yeah, sure.
Yeah,
all good.
I look forward to working with you on that, and kind of helping you to promote that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So with that, I'm going to bid you goodbye, and we'll see you soon. I'm not sure we'll see you next week, but we might even see you tomorrow. Who knows? Bye-bye. Bye-bye, Paul. Bye-bye, Tony.
Bye-bye.
Bye.